I'm Travis Brown, founder and CEO of Mojo Up Marketing and Media, and this is my podcast where I talk to the most successful Black and brown business executives who've broken through the barriers of today's business culture. Welcome to Mojo Up Live. My name is Travis Brown. I am your host, and today I have a good friend with me who is an amazing husband, father, and he is a judge, so beware. So welcome to the show, Chad Hill, my man.
Appreciate you, man.
Thanks for stopping by.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
It's always good to have a judge on your side. So let me ask you a question. What is the best part about being a judge?
Ooh, that's a hard one. On one hand, but the best part is being able to affect people's lives and to be able to help. Most people think that judges are, putting people in jail and affecting their life in a negative way. But for the most part, yesterday, for instance, I granted the adoption of a young baby to some new parents. So you really get to affect people's lives in a positive way, and that is really fun.
We're going to track through and figure out how you got to be that. But let me back up and talk about, because you have a family.
Yes.
In this world. So your dad was a judge, right?
Yes.
So talk to me about, how did you get to even understand this world and go back to as a kid and when watching your dad do what he was doing?
Well, my father started at least as far back as I can remember, he was a state trooper and put himself through law school and went into the practice and ultimately went to the bench. From as long as I can remember as a little kid, I don't know how it happened. Maybe it was because of my proximity to him, but I've always wanted to be a lawyer. I didn't so much have a plan on being a judge. So his path was, our paths were significantly different as far as making it to the bench.
When you think about, the fact that you're a judge and he was a judge, how did that, the day that you decided to kind of go in that room and become a judge, what was that like, knowing that now, like my dad was and I was, and not only that you were judges, but there's some history behind not many people that look like you becoming judges?
Well, yes, I will say that. So I am what is called a magistrate judge in Hamilton County. And what that means is, as opposed to being an elected judge, I am an appointed judge. So I've been appointed as a judge by the elected judges in Hamilton County. So when you say my path, it was not part of my original path to become a judge. And how is it, given that my father was a judge? It was and is a very proud thing. As a matter of fact, when I became a judge, he robed me during my ceremony, and I wear his robe on the bench.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I know this comes at a time where you've been able to memorialize your father and taken some steps to kind of reflect on kind of that journey. Let me go back and ask you another question just on that process. But, when you think about even being an attorney or being a lawyer, what took you down that path to even think about just legal from that perspective? Because I think of that like it's cool on TV shows, but there's a lot of work, a lot of process to even have that knowledge to become that. So what was the aspiration around that?
Well, I think it still goes back to the orientation of having a lawyer in the house. And so it started, I think, there. And I've just always had an affinity for the law, but I never knew what that meant or how to go there. I knew that I wasn't smart enough to be a doctor. My math isn't the greatest, so I wasn't going to be an accountant. And my life and orientation just kind of led me down that road. And it was a long road. I didn't go into law school straight out of college. It was a road between college and law school.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that from where you're from, high school, college, and then ultimately where you went to law school.
So I went to high school I spent a few years at Park Tudor here in Indianapolis. And my senior year, I was a tennis player. And I spent my senior year at North Central and was fortunately part of a high school team where we won the state championship. And the biggest benefit of that to me, aside from winning, of course, was that really was my ticket to go to college. I wasn't sure that I was going to college. I didn't know how that was going to happen. My grades were not the best. And so I ended up going to St. Louis University. And that was an eye-opening experience for me on a variety of levels. And graduated from college. And then I left college and told my father, I said, I think I want to go to California. And he said, for what? And I said, I don't know. So he said, well, I think that I have fulfilled my obligation to you by getting you educated. So if you want to go out to California, knock yourself out, but anything that you want to do from here on out, that's going to be on you. And I spent several years out in California, Southern California, trying to find my way. And ultimately, I made it back. I got a call from a friend of mine from college. And he said, hey, Chad, I thought that, didn't you say you wanted to go to law school? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, I'm attending school here in Detroit. How would you like to come up to Detroit? And I said, I hadn't really given that a lot of thought, but sure, I went up and visited with him. And some of the faculty there. That school was originally called the Detroit College of Law, which ultimately became Michigan State. And shortly before the transition from the Detroit College of Law, which I think is where Tiger Stadium currently sits, right where that school used to be, I transferred to the University of Detroit, Mercy Law School. Graduated from there, came back, and studied for the bar, and as God would have it, I passed it, and it was there, and it was on after that.
Let me ask you this, because I have no real understanding of the difficulty level of the bar. Like, what makes this thing so difficult?
Well, I can't speak to medical school and the schooling for accountants. When you go to law school, it's not like college. You study for an entire semester without quizzes and exams. At the end of that semester, you take a test. And at some level, that determines whether you go on to the next semester. And when you're attending full time, you do that for 3 years. And at the end of that 3 years, the bar encompasses everything that you've learned over that course of 3 years. And it's a volume of information. The type of tests that are administered for the bar, when I took it, I believe it was the last time that there was a written form of the bar. So there's a what we call a multi-state portion of the bar that is multiple choice. And if you're not oriented around multiple choice testing, that can be difficult. And then you add an essay to that. It is an exam over the course of 2 days, and it is grueling. It is stressful, and one of the reasons it is so stressful is because you've gone to school for one thing, and that is to be licensed as a lawyer. And the only thing standing between you and that is that test. And if you don't pass that test, percentages have it that your chances of passing it go down every time you try and take it. Wow. So it is it's a stress-oriented dynamic.
We'll get back to some of the business stuff in a second. But so your husband, you're a father of three. Have a couple kids in college. So
Yeah.
how did that separation, or actually one in college, one out of college, and one in high school. So how is that father role of the adult children's, some that think they're adult children's, and maybe others that still think they're adult children's?
Well, you're a dad. It's full-time, 24/7 job. You think in your mind that you have an idea of what your being a dad is supposed to be, and at some level you say, "Oh, these parts that I didn't like when I was a kid, what my dad did, I'm going to change that." My goal was to be flexible as a dad, as much as I could, and keeping my kids between the lines. So, our oldest is 24. He's got a little bit of air under his wings. He's out of college, did well. He's got a job, and he's trying to take flight. My middle, my daughter, my only freshman in college, and the dad thing is a fluid dynamic as well, because I grew up with brothers. They're boys in the house. And having a daughter is, and I can only speak for myself, but having a daughter is one of the greatest joys on one hand, and it is one of the scariest things in the world on the other hand. And so that has allowed me to grow as a dad. You've got a daughter as well, and then we have our youngest. And that brings its own challenge because his siblings have left the house. He's the only one to know what it's like to be in the house without a sibling there. The oldest, when he left to go to college, his brother and sister were still in the house. Sister leaves. When she left, that left our youngest. And so we try to accommodate for that so he doesn't fall into the trap of, oh, the youngest is the most spoiled, the youngest, it can be lonely. It is all those things that we try to manage and kind of keep level. And it's, being a dad is the greatest thing in the world. So I
gotta
wouldn't
ask
change
this though, and I know you, and we're friends, we've been out, we've hung out. Like, you're always so calm, so mellow. Like, is there the?
Oh, it's only on the outside. On the inside, it's all a churn. It's all a churn. No, I'm not always that way. But I will say, at some level, being on the bench, being a lawyer, being on the bench, you are reprogrammed when you're a lawyer. And I didn't realize that initially. At some point during the education of law school, for me, it was right after the end of, I think, my first year. I came home for a holiday, and there was snow on the ground. I was in a gas station getting something, and I walked in, and there was a sign that said slippery or something like that. And all I could do was see the liability. There was water on the ground, inside the store, and all I could see. And at that point, even watching television. So the keeping calm is something that I think helps a judge. You can't ride the roller coaster with the participants in court. You've got to be able to objectively assess and analyze what's going on. You can't be emotional. You're supposed to leave that for those that are participating.
So one of the things that always interests me is attorneys or lawyers that decide a small practice versus kind of the big box, law firms. What was your thought process, and what did you do, and why?
Well, my plan after graduation was to go in a big firm. My father was already part of a firm, and so I hung out with him a little bit while I was putting out resumes and so forth. And that really morphed into me going into his practice. And that was a medium-sized firm, about 15 lawyers. And I hit the ground running. I had the benefit of having a built-in mentor and all of that. So I did that for a while. And after my father went to the bench, the firm itself, several of the partners retired, and so I went out on my own with a couple other lawyers, small firm, and that is, back then it was challenging, and I really shudder to think of how challenging that would be nowadays. And I also had the ability to work in a larger firm. Dan Picard here in Indianapolis, which is now, I believe, Benish. It is a totally different environment. When you are doing this sole practitioner, small firm thing, you're doing it all. You are doing the accounting, you're doing the marketing, it's one big hustle. When you are in a larger firm, you do get, you find your space, you're keeping your time. Things are not quite as hectic, I guess you would call it. It's still busy, it's still work, but there are people in the larger firms that are doing some of the things that you would ordinarily do. When you go into a large firm, you don't worry about how the lights turn on and who's cleaning the carpet after work. So yeah, it is. So there's that component. But in the larger firm, one of the biggest benefits in a larger firm is that if issues come in, you have a case and you have questions, you want to bounce something off of somebody, someone who may have more experience than you in a particular area, all you have to do is walk down the hall. When you are a sole practitioner, you've got to work it out. You've got to work it out, pull on whatever resources you have outside of the office. So yeah, they are two totally different ways of,
Now you also have an affinity, or have had affinity for racing.
Oh, for sure.
And kind of put a couple toes in there. So talk to me a little bit about that part and doing some racing, some team stuff. Like that was an interesting part of your journey.
Very much. It was another thing that didn't happen by design. I was sitting in my office, in my sole practitioner office, and I got a call from one of my brother's friends. His name is Tice Carlson. Shout out to Tice. Tice was a IndyCar driver, and I always had an affinity for racing just in general, going to the 500 and all of that. And truth be told, when I graduated, my plan was not to be a litigator. My plan was to be a theatrical agent. I thought I might take my skills out to one of the coasts and represent maybe some movie stars or that sort of thing, or even athletes. Tice calls out of the blue and says, "Hey, would you be interested in being my agent?" And I said, "Sure." But I didn't know what I was saying sure to. I didn't know what an agent did, or, as far as racing was concerned, I knew what it looked like with basketball and football and maybe baseball. And so what it really turned out to be was when you are an agent or manager for a race car driver, that really means, can you go out and find me some money? And can you go out and find me some money to run, not go out and find money for endorsements or that sort of thing. It costs a lot, and oftentimes race car drivers have to take their own money into a team for a seat. And so that was the beginning. And Tice was a integral part of that. And while that was going on with me, my brother Marty, who had studied sports management I think it was in Western Illinois University. He started upon graduation, he was working for Michael Andretti. He got a job interning at this law firm that represented Michael. And so while I'm doing this, my brother Marty is on the other side of the racing equation doing his thing. And ultimately, we started moving more towards each other through the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And a short while in, I, and with my brother's assistance, we put together the first ever black-owned racing team with a black driver into the 500. And that was with 310 Racing, with George Mack as the driver. And that is a interesting story in and of itself. And you know, I know this is your show. I just wanted to, as a brief aside, to show you how life can really change on a moment's notice. Somebody connected me with George Mack. He and I hadn't met, but we had talked a lot on the phone. I knew that he was a champion go-kart racer. He won championships in Europe and so forth, but he had never stepped foot in a race car. And I get a call out of the blue from this 310 team out of Inglewood, California. And they said that based upon their racing program, they wanted a black driver. And the hustle inside of me said, hey, I didn't know for sure, but I said, I think I have the perfect person, George Mack. And at the time that I called George, he was living in Inglewood, California. He was washing cars for his uncle's car dealership. And I called him and said, I may have an opportunity for you.
Wow.
And we went out. That was I think I called him in November, went out and saw him in December. We signed the deal in January. He was in the car testing in, I believe, March down in Florida. He had never stepped foot in a race car. That was March. By the time May came around, he was qualifying for the 500 and finished 13th.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. And unfortunately, due to some cultural dynamics, you know, there are not a lot of African Americans, and at that time, there weren't any really at all anywhere in racing, in motorsports. And that, I think the cultural dynamic that 310 and George brought to motorsports at that time, it was a phenomenal energy, but there was a lack of awareness on behalf of the team and the driver. And unfortunately, that program did not, it finished out racing, I think, that season and did not race after that.
You know, I think it's interesting. There's a lot of interesting aspects to that story. You know, but in the George, you know, maybe he wasn't the first, but at the time he was an only, and a lot of us are finding ourselves.
Willie T was the first.
Billy T was right. A lot of us find ourselves in those situations where we're either the first or we're the only one in the room.
Yeah.
I guess I'm curious to hear from your perspective, because I'm assuming a lot of times in your role now and where you are, you're the only.
Yes.
Maybe even the first to do it in this particular county.
Yes.
What is that burden like? Or is it a burden?
Well, I don't know if I would necessarily refer to it as a burden, but like anything, you want to do well. And when you are the first in an environment, that is your primary goal, and you almost take the the perspective of if I do what I need to do and I do it well, then the rest will follow. And that is true to a degree, but the other part of that equation is even if you are doing as well as you desire, you still have the environment around you that has to acclimate to your presence. And sometimes that is difficult, more difficult than other times. I will say that in my environment, it has been very supportive, very helpful, very open. Of course, every now and again you run into dynamics and scenarios that you wish weren't there, but you roll with it and keep going.
So what does that mean, like, for the industry of lawyers and judges? Are we seeing an increase? Are we seeing that there are more lawyers, more judges of color coming to the ground, or are they still behind like all the other industries?
They're still behind. The numbers, percentage-wise, are not moving as much as they could and as much as they should. When you consider how many lawyers, for instance, are in the state of Indiana and how many lawyers are being generated each year through passing of the bar and so forth, even enrollment, the percentages of minority, and particularly black male minorities, are still among the lowest of the percentages. So there is still a lot more work and exposure that needs to be made in getting those numbers up.
Is that something, in your opinion, that starts with an education at an early age, a concept, an idea? Like, how do we bridge that gap? How do we create more opportunities, you think?
Well, I think it starts with an interest, and the interest has to start from awareness. I try to allow for my court to be open so that I have people young kids, even teenagers and sometimes adults who will come and sit with me on the bench to see what it's like, to see what the system that they hear about on television and news and radio, and they hear about, oh, the system this and the system that. Well, rather than hear about it, why don't you come in and see what it's really like? And more often than not, those that come in and see it in real life gain a different level of appreciation and, frankly, even more respect for the process and the environment itself. And I think that exposure is what will assist in allowing the numbers and the interest to push those numbers.
So it's like the ride. You can do the ride along with police officers. I can do
exactly.
I can do the ride along with the judge.
Yeah.
Man, I got to get signed up for that.
Yes, anytime.
Let's go. I have one more question I'm going to end with, but between now and then, I'm going to do what we call the Mojo Hot Seat.
Uh-oh.
So
Is this the hot seat?
This hot seat.
Okay.
I'm just going to ask a series of fun questions, 1 or 2 word answers.
Okay.
Let's go. First of all, favorite place to vacation?
Favorite, anywhere my family is.
That's awful. That's nice. That's sweet. Like, no destination. Like, where you guys like to go?
I will say that we love Southern California.
Okay.
We love Southern California.
Coolest city you've ever been to?
Coolest city I've ever been to, New York City.
Favorite restaurant?
Oh. Favorite restaurant. I would say that Ocean Prime.
Okay.
And Ocean Prime only because that is, my wife and I, we have just a special connection to that place.
Favorite chain restaurant?
Ooh. Favorite chain.
'Cause I'm a chain guy.
Favorite chain.
Basic.
Favorite chain. Ruth Chris.
All right. Favorite brand?
Favorite brand. I am going to have to say, you know what? You got me on that one. It's going to be controversial, but I'm just going to have to say, I like Nike stuff.
That ain't controversial.
I like Nike stuff.
That's how we roll. Sports team.
I'm going to have to say, do I have to pick a year or just a team?
Just a team.
All right. Well, since I'm doing that, I am going to go. I'm going to stick with the Colts. I ride or die with the Colts.
Let's go. Favorite college.
St. Louis University.
TV show.
And you know what? I should have known that off the top. My favorite TV show. When we come back to that.
One of your favorite movies.
Godfather.
Favorite kind of music.
I like all music, really. I can't narrow it down. I like R&B. I like rap. I like pop music and even country music. So yeah, and I will throw some classical in there too. You know, give me some Bocelli and I'm good. I'm good.
My man is over here wilding out. All right, that last chance. Favorite TV show.
Favorite TV show.
Or even favorite as growing up as a kid. Something.
You know what? Strangely, I like Seinfeld.
Okay.
Yeah.
And charity that you'd like to support.
Oh, Riley. Yeah, Riley. Riley is it's got a special place for us.
So you're off the hot seat, but I do have one last question for you, and that is, you know, at some point in time in your life, you know, when now you have these two numbers on the other side of your dash, and people are going to get to say something about Chad Hill. What do you want people to say about you?
You know, I would like for people, when they think of me, to say that, you know, Chad, he put the work in, and he cared, and he wanted others to enjoy the same. Yeah. And if I could add that he is and was totally devoted to his family.
All right. Well, Chad, man, we're out of time, but it's time.
We're out of time. I'm just getting comfortable.
It's time for you to wrap it up. So she's going to give you the board.
I get to wrap it up?
Yep, and it's just get this. Do that.
Do I turn it around this way? All right. It's a wrap.